The email glowed on my screen at 3:17 a.m., sent from my husband's account to an address I didn't recognize. I hadn't been snooping. Drew had left his laptop open while he took a business call outside on our deck. The subject line caught my eye. Tomorrow night arrangements. What made me click wasn't suspicion, but practicality. Tomorrow night was our 8th anniversary, and I thought perhaps he was finalizing dinner plans. Instead, I found myself staring at hotel confirmation details and intimate instructions that turned my blood to ice water. Wear that black dress I bought you last month. I've told Rebecca I'll be working late after our obligatory anniversary dinner. The usual suite is booked from 9 p.m. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. Instead, a strange calm settled over me as I scrolled through the email thread between my husband and someone named Natalie Pearson, the recently hired marketing director at Summit Digital Solutions, the healthcare software company Drew and I had built together from nothing. Though if you asked my husband, he'd say he built it while I helped with some technical aspects. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 8 years earlier, when Drew proposed, I was outpacing him professionally. My algorithms for patient care prediction had caught the attention of 3 major healthcare systems, while Drew was struggling to find his footing after an unsuccessful stint at a tech startup. I had the idea, the technical expertise, and the healthcare industry connections that would eventually become Summit Digital's foundation. What Drew brought was confidence, business school connections, and an undeniable talent for making people believe in his vision. Even when that vision had originated with me. "We could do this together, Becca," he'd said, eyes alight with possibility. "Your technical genius, my business acumen, we'd be unstoppable." I believed him. I believed in us. I liquidated my savings and deferred a prestigious job offer to launch Summit Digital Solutions. On paper, the ownership was 51% Drew, 49% me. His idea to make decision-making cleaner, he'd explained. But there was a clause my father, a cautious small business owner, had insisted upon. A contingency arrangement that would reverse the ownership percentages if certain conditions occurred, including financial misconduct. "It's just a formality," Drew had assured me, signing the document without reading it carefully. "We're partners in everything." Now I scrolled through months of emails between my husband and Natalie. The correspondence went beyond an affair. They were discussing a post-summit strategy involving a new company that would essentially duplicate our core technology while leaving me behind. Attached to one email was a pitch deck for investors, with my proprietary algorithms rebranded as RevitaCare Analytics, developed by industry pioneer Andrew Mitchell. I closed the laptop and moved to our home office, where I kept secured backups of everything, including the contingency agreement Drew had so casually dismissed. For the next 2 hours, I reviewed our company structure, financial accounts, and recent transactions. What I found made my stomach turn. $350,000 transferred from our joint business development fund to an LLC registered to Natalie Pearson, under the vague description, Strategic Marketing Initiatives. My husband had spent our future on his Mistress's shell company. The next morning, I called 2 people, Marcus Thompson, a corporate attorney who had been my mentor during graduate school, and Olivia Chen, my closest friend who happened to be a PR specialist focusing on corporate communications. I told them both the same thing. I need your help and absolute discretion. By the time Drew returned from his morning run, I was showered, dressed, and making coffee as if it were any ordinary day. "You're up early," he remarked, kissing my cheek. "Excited about tonight?" I handed him a cup of coffee, exactly as he liked it. "Absolutely. 8 years is something to celebrate." "I've got meetings until 6, but I'll meet you at Cascadia at 7, he said, checking his watch. "I've arranged something special." "I'm sure you have," I replied, my voice giving nothing away. After he left, I drove to Marcus's office downtown. The veteran attorney listened without interruption as I laid out what I'd discovered, along with my plan. "This is airtight," he said, reviewing the contingency agreement. "But Rebecca, once you trigger this, there's no going back. Your marriage, the company culture, your professional reputation, everything will change." "Everything." "Already has changed," I replied. "Drew just doesn't know it yet." By 6 that evening, I was seated at our usual table at Cascadia, wearing the dark blue dress Drew had always said brought out my eyes. My makeup was flawless, my expression composed. When Drew arrived, handsome, in his tailored suit, several heads turned. My husband had that effect on people, an easy confidence that made everyone want his approval. "You look beautiful," he said, taking his seat. "I've ordered the 15 Pinot you love." We toasted to 8 years of marriage. We reminisced about our honeymoon in New Zealand. We discussed Summit's growing client base and the new contract with Pacific Northwest Healthcare that would expand our patient care platform to 15 more hospitals. Anyone watching would have seen a successful couple celebrating a milestone. At 8:30, right on cue, Drew's phone buzzed. "I'm sorry," he said, checking the message with practiced concern. "Server issue at the office. The deployment team needs me to sign off on some changes." He gave me an apologetic smile. "You understand, right? This Pacific Northwest integration is crucial." "Of course," I said, reaching for his hand. "Actually, why don't I come with you? I could help troubleshoot if it's a technical issue." Panic flashed briefly in his eyes. "No need to ruin your evening. Stay, have dessert. I shouldn't be more than an hour." "On our anniversary? I'd rather be with you," I insisted, signaling for the check. "Besides, I haven't visited the office in weeks." Drew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he recovered quickly. "Always the dedicated co-founder," he said with a tight smile. The drive to Summit's headquarters was filled with Drew's increasingly desperate attempts to dissuade me. The problem was minor. The tech team had it under control. I should go home and relax. With each excuse, my certainty grew. The Summit Digital Solutions building was mostly dark when we arrived, except for the executive floor. As we rode the elevator, Drew was unusually quiet, typing rapidly on his phone. When the doors opened, we were greeted by the last person Drew wanted to see, Natalie Pearson, wearing a striking black dress I'd never seen before, holding a champagne bottle and 2 glasses. "Surprise!" she began, then froze when she saw me standing beside Drew. The silence that followed was exquisite in its awkwardness. Natalie's confident smile crumbled. Drew's face drained of color. "Natalie," I said pleasantly, stepping forward. "That's a beautiful dress. New, isn't it?" Her eyes darted to Drew, who stood paralyzed between us. "Rebecca, we were just working late on the Pacific Northwest integration?" I finished for her. "How dedicated of you both. And champagne to celebrate the deployment?" Drew finally found his voice. "Becca, this isn't what it looks like." I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even me. "Drew, this is exactly what it looks like. The only surprise is that you thought I wouldn't figure it out." I walked past them both, toward the boardroom where the lights were on. Inside, I found exactly what I expected. Not emergency server deployment work, but a romantic setting. Music played softly. Rose petals were scattered across the conference table, and a small gift box sat beside a room keycard. 8 months, I said, turning to face them as they followed me in. That's how long this has been going on. But the financial transfers to Revita Care Analytics LLC only started 3 months ago. Did it take that long to convince you she was worth draining? Our company's development fund, Drew? Or did the idea to steal my algorithms come later? Drew's shock at my knowledge was almost comical. How did you know about the $350,000 you've diverted to Natalie's shell company? Or about your plans to duplicate Summit's technology and leave me behind? I placed my handbag on the table and removed a folder. I'm your wife and the co-founder of this company. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Natalie stepped forward, her confidence returning. Whatever you think you know, Rebecca, this isn't personal. It's business. Summit has outgrown its original structure, and we're simply planning its evolution. By stealing my intellectual property and company funds, I opened the folder and removed several documents. That's not evolution, Natalie. That's fraud. Drew moved toward me, hands raised placatingly. Becca, let's discuss this privately. There are aspects of the business you don't understand. Actually, I interrupted, there are aspects of the business you don't understand, Drew. I handed him the contingency agreement we'd signed years earlier. Section 4, Paragraph 7. In the event of financial misconduct involving company assets exceeding $100,000, ownership control reverts to the minority shareholder. He skimmed the document, his expression morphing from dismissive to concerned. This can't be legally binding. I'm the majority owner. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not anymore, I said as the elevator doors opened again. Marcus Thompson entered, followed by Daniel Wilson, our CFO, and Grace Sullivan, the executive assistant Drew had hired, but who had always shown me genuine respect. Mrs. Mitchell asked, "Us to meet her here," Daniel explained, looking confused by the scene before him. She mentioned financial irregularities that needed immediate attention. Drew's face hardened. This is a private matter between my wife and me. Whatever she's told you is documented in detail, I finished, handing Daniel a financial report. Unauthorized transfers totaling $350,000 to an external LLC registered to Ms. Pearson, disguised as marketing initiatives. The funds were earmarked for our patient outcome prediction module improvements. Daniel reviewed the report, his professional composure slipping as he grasped the magnitude of what he was seeing. These transactions bypassed standard approval protocols. I flagged several of them, but you assured me they were authorized strategic investments. They were strategic, Drew insisted, for market expansion opportunities that wouldn't fit within Summit's current structure. You mean opportunities that wouldn't include your wife? Marcus asked, his tone calm but cutting. Natalie stepped backward, distancing herself physically from Drew. I was assured these arrangements were above board. As marketing director, I was merely implementing the CEO's strategic vision. Her swift self-preservation wasn't surprising, but the speed with which she abandoned Drew was. His betrayal had been both personal and professional, but hers was proving to be just as calculating. Daniel, I said, I've called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. As acting controller under the contingency agreement, I need access to all financial systems immediately to prevent any further unauthorized transfers. Drew laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is absurd. The board won't support this hostile takeover based on a document I signed years ago that you've clearly manipulated. The document hasn't been manipulated, Mr. Mitchell, Marcus E. interjected. I've reviewed the original with the signatures and notarization intact. It's legally binding. I turned to Grace. Please restrict access to all company systems for both Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Pearson, effective immediately. Change the security protocols as we discussed earlier today. Drew's eyes widened. You planned this whole scene? Our anniversary dinner? Coming to the office? This was a setup? No, Drew. You set this up the moment you decided to betray everything we built together. I removed a small object from my bag and placed it on the conference table. It was a key fob for the executive. Offices. Consider yourself on administrative leave pending the board's review. Drew's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. You can't push me out of my own company. Our company, I corrected. And I'm not pushing you out. Your actions have already done that. Natalie, seeing which way the wind was blowing, gathered her purse. I should go. Actually, I said, I'd like you to stay, Natalie. Given your intimate knowledge of these unauthorized transactions, you'll be a key witness in the financial audit beginning tomorrow. I smiled thinly. Unless you'd prefer to discuss your role with the authorities instead of our internal team? Her perfectly made-up face paled. I'll cooperate fully, of course. Drew watched this exchange with growing realization. Not only was his affair exposed, but his co-conspirator was abandoning their scheme to save herself. "You've been planning this for how long?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I discovered your affair and financial misconduct yesterday," I replied honestly. "But I've been preparing for something like this since the day you convinced me to accept minority ownership for simplicity's sake. My father always said hope for the best, but document for the worst." I turned to address everyone in the room. "It's late, and tomorrow will be challenging. Daniel, I'll need a complete financial audit ready for the board. Grace, please distribute the meeting agenda I sent you earlier. Marcus will attend as legal counsel." As they nodded and began to leave, I faced Drew one last time. "You can stay at the Heathman tonight. The room's already paid for, after all." He stood frozen, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. "Becca, we can work this out. Everything I've done was for yourself," I finished. "Goodbye, Drew." As I walked toward the elevator, Natalie stepped into my path. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "the marketing strategy I developed for Summit is genuine. The patient engagement platform I proposed could increase user adoption by 40%. I studied her, ambitious, talented, and morally flexible. Submit a proper proposal through the correct channels, and if it has merit, we'll consider it. Summit needs innovation, not conspiracy." Surprise flickered across her face. "You'd still consider my work after this?" "I evaluate business decisions based on value, not emotion," I replied. Something my husband never understood. The next morning, the boardroom that had been set for seduction became the stage for Summit's transformation. I presented the financial evidence, the contingency agreement, and my vision for the company's future. The board members were initially skeptical. Victor Ramirez and Patricia Kim had been Drew's staunch supporters, but the documented financial misconduct was irrefutable. By noon, I was confirmed as Summit Digital's CEO and majority shareholder. By evening, the company had issued a carefully worded statement about leadership restructuring following internal financial review. Olivia's PR guidance was invaluable in framing the transition as strategic rather than scandalous. Drew tried multiple tactics over the following weeks: threats, pleas, legal challenges, but the contingency agreement held firm. When he finally realized he couldn't regain control, he sold his remaining shares and moved to Seattle, where rumors suggested he was courting investors for a new venture. As for Natalie, her marketing proposal did have merit. After a 6-month probationary period under close supervision, I approved her patient engagement platform, which became one of Summit's most successful features. Our professional relationship remained strictly that, professional, bounded by clear ethical guidelines and transparent accountability. 6 months later, Summit Digital Solutions secured its largest contract yet, expanding our patient care platform nationwide. The morning we announced the deal, I found a handwritten note on my desk from Grace. "Your algorithms, your leadership, your vision. As it should have been all along." That evening, I stood at the window of my office, the office that had once been Drew's, looking out at Portland's skyline. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed everything I'd built had instead revealed my true strength. In trying to take what was mine, Drew had actually given me something invaluable: the opportunity to reclaim my power and reshape Summit into the company it was always meant to be. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most complete transformations. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed reveals what you actually deserve. And sometimes, just sometimes, handing over the keys to a kingdom built on lies create space to build an empire grounded in truth. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I established my leadership at Summit Digital. Each morning, I arrived at the office before dawn, reviewing financial records and meeting with department heads to reassure them that despite the dramatic change in leadership, our company's mission remained unchanged. The executive floor that had once been Drew's domain transformed under my direction. I replaced the dark leather furniture with more collaborative seating arrangements and removed the intimidating barriers that had kept staff at a distance. Daniel Wilson, our CFO, proved to be an invaluable ally during the transition. On a particularly challenging Tuesday morning, he arrived at my office carrying a stack of financial reports so thick it barely fit in his arms. "I've completed the comprehensive audit you requested," he said, placing the documents on my desk. "It's worse than we initially thought." I gestured for him to sit. "Tell me." Daniel ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, a habit I'd noticed emerged when he was particularly troubled. The $350,000 transfer to Natalie's LLC was just the beginning. "I've uncovered a pattern of financial misdirection going back nearly 18 months. Drew created multiple shell companies, each receiving consulting fees for work that was either grossly overvalued or never performed at all." He opened the top folder and pointed to a highlighted transaction. This one caught my attention. CloudMind Analytics received $180,000 for proprietary algorithm optimization last year. When I investigated, I discovered it's registered to Drew's college roommate, Jeremy Phillips. And let me guess, no deliverables. In our system? Nothing substantive. Just a 12-page report that appears to be mostly copied from publicly available research papers. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing this new information. "How much in total?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Just over $1.2 million. The figure hit me like a physical blow. Our company, while successful, wasn't so profitable that we could absorb that kind of loss without consequences. That money should have gone toward research, employee benefits, or expanding our client base. Have you been able to trace where the money went after it reached these shell companies?" "Partially. Most was transferred to offshore accounts in the Caymans and Singapore. From there, the trail gets murky, but I've engaged a forensic accounting firm to dig deeper." I nodded, already formulating our next steps. "We need to recover what we can and prevent any further bleeding. Freeze all consulting contracts immediately. Pending review. Set up new approval protocols requiring dual authorization for any expenditure over $10,000. And compile a complete report for law enforcement. Financial fraud at this scale isn't just a civil matter." Daniel looked uneasy. "Rebecca, pressing charges against Drew will generate significant publicity. The company's reputation will survive," I finished firmly. "Transparency is our path forward, not covering up his crimes." After Daniel left, I stood at my office window, watching Portland come to life in the morning light. The Space Needle stood in the distance, a reminder that just 100 miles north, Drew was likely plotting his next move. I wondered if he realized yet the full extent of what he'd lost. Not just his marriage and company, but his reputation, and possibly his freedom. My intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. "Ms. Mitchell? There's a Claudia Mitchell here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting." Drew's mother. Of course she would come now. "Send her in, Grace, and hold my calls." Claudia Mitchell had always been impeccably put together, and today was no exception. At 68, she still commanded attention with her tailored clothing and perfectly coiffed silver hair. What was different today was the uncertainty in her usually confident stride as she entered my office. "Rebecca," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive Pacific Northwest accent that softened her R's. "Thank you for seeing me. Would you like to sit down?" I gestured to the sofa area rather than the more formal chairs in front of my desk. She nodded, carefully placing her designer handbag beside her. For a moment, we sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between us. "I suppose you're here about Drew," I finally said. "He told me everything." Her eyes, so similar to her son's, searched my face. "About the affair, about the financial improprieties, about how you orchestrated his removal from the company." I raised an eyebrow. "Did he tell you he was planning to steal my algorithms and start a competing company with his mistress?" Claudia flinched slightly. "He mentioned creative differences about the company's direction." "Creative differences," I repeated with a humorless laugh. "Is that what he calls embezzling $2 million in intellectual property theft?" Her eyes widened at the figure, and I realized Drew had minimized his actions even to his mother. "That can't be right. I have the financial records, Claudia. I've seen the emails outlining their plans. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a misunderstanding. It was calculated betrayal, both personal and professional." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, a habit I'd noticed in Drew as well when he was uncomfortable. "I'm not here to defend his actions. What he did to you was unconscionable, and I told him as much." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm here because, despite everything, Summit Digital is still our family legacy. Drew's father would be heartbroken to see it torn apart by scandal." "The company isn't being torn apart by scandal. It's being rebuilt after your son nearly destroyed it. By pressing criminal charges? By dragging the Mitchell name through public court proceedings?" I studied my mother-in-law carefully. Despite our differences over the years, I had always respected her intelligence and pragmatism. "What exactly are you proposing, Claudia?" "A private settlement. Drew returns any misappropriated funds he still has access to. He signs a non-compete agreement preventing him from developing similar technology. In exchange, you handle this as an internal corporate matter rather than a criminal one." The offer was tempting in its simplicity, a clean break without the messiness of criminal proceedings. But it also felt like another form of erasure, another way of diminishing the impact of Drew's actions. "And what message would that send?" I asked quietly. "That if you're wealthy and well-connected enough, there are no real consequences for fraud? That I value the Mitchell family reputation more than the integrity of the company I helped build?" Claudia's expression hardened. "You've made your point, Rebecca. You've taken his company, his reputation. He gave those things away." I interrupted. "Every decision he made, from the first time he transferred company funds to his mistress's account to the moment he planned to duplicate my work and leave me behind, those were his choices. I'm simply ensuring there are appropriate consequences." She stood abruptly, gathering her handbag. "He still loves you, despite everything." "No, Claudia. Drew loves the idea of me. The supportive wife who stayed in the background while he took credit for my work. He loved the convenience of our marriage and the credibility I lent to his image. But he never truly saw me." At the door, she paused. "Will you at least consider my proposal? For the sake of the 8 years you were part of our family?" "I'll consider it," I conceded. "But I won't promise anything." After she left, I called Marcus to discuss the legal implications of a private settlement versus criminal charges. As always, he provided clear-eyed analysis without judgment. "Legally, you're on solid ground either way," he explained. "The evidence supports criminal charges, but private settlements in corporate fraud cases aren't uncommon. The question is what achieves your ultimate goals for Summit." "And what about justice?" I asked. There was a thoughtful pause before he answered. "Justice takes many forms, Rebecca. Sometimes it's a public reckoning, sometimes it's building something so successful that it stands as living proof of what was nearly stolen from you. Only you can decide which path feels right." That evening, I drove to the Oregon coast, to the small cabin Drew and I had purchased 3 years earlier, as a weekend retreat. It had always been my sanctuary, a place where the constant roar of the Pacific drowned out everything else. Drew had rarely visited after the first year, claiming it was too remote for his taste. I walked along the shore as sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and pinks, weighing my options. The criminal case would be straightforward, given the evidence, but it would consume time and energy I could otherwise devote to rebuilding Summit. A private settlement would be quieter, but might feel like Drew was once again escaping the full consequences of his actions. As darkness fell, I realized there might be a third option, one that satisfied both justice and pragmatism. The next morning, I called Olivia to discuss a communications strategy before requesting that Grace arrange a meeting with Drew. "Are you sure about this?" Olivia asked, concern evident in her voice. "Seeing him again so soon. I'm not approaching this as his wife," I explained. "This is a business negotiation, and I need to handle it directly." 2 days later, Drew arrived at Summit Digital's headquarters. I had deliberately chosen to meet in the main conference room rather than my office. Neutral territory with glass walls that ensured our meeting would be visible but not audible to staff. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Good. Thank you for coming," I said formally as he took a seat across from me. "Your message didn't leave much choice." His tone was defensive, but there was something else there too. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "You said you had a proposal regarding our situation." "I do." I opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "These are the terms I'm prepared to offer." Drew scanned the first page, his expression darkening. "You can't be serious. This is extortion." "It's accountability," I corrected. Option 1, you return $2 million in misappropriated funds, sign a comprehensive non-compete agreement, and make a public statement acknowledging your misconduct. In exchange, Summit Digital will not pursue criminal charges. And if I refuse? Option 2, we provide our evidence to the federal prosecutor. Given the paper trail, you're looking at fraud charges carrying potential sentences of 5 to 10 years. He leaned back, a familiar calculating look crossing his face. "You're forgetting something, Becca. A fraud case means public disclosure of Summit's vulnerabilities. Your stock will plummet. Clients might jump ship. Is that really what you want?" "I've already implemented a transparency strategy," I replied calmly. "We've contacted our major clients privately, explaining the leadership transition and financial reforms. The board is prepared for temporary market fluctuations. Meanwhile, our development team has accelerated the release of our new patient outcomes module, which early testing suggests will increase our market share by 15%. The surprise on his face was gratifying. He had always underestimated my business acumen, assuming my technical expertise didn't translate to strategic thinking. "There's a third option," I continued. "You return the misappropriated funds, plus interest. You sign the non-compete. You make no public statements about Summit or me. In exchange, we handle this privately and provide you with a consulting contract that allows you to maintain professional credibility." "A consulting contract?" He looked suspicious. "What's the catch?" "The catch, Drew, is that you'll actually have to deliver real work. You'll advise on client acquisition in new markets, something you genuinely excel at, but under strict financial controls and supervision. Your compensation will be fair, but modest. No decision-making authority, no access to proprietary technology." He studied me with newfound wariness. "Why would you offer this after everything?" "Because unlike you, I can separate personal feelings from business decisions. You have relationships with clients that could benefit Summit. I'm pragmatic enough to leverage that while ensuring you can never harm this company again." For several minutes, Drew said nothing, weighing his options. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. The potential prison time versus the humiliation of working under my supervision versus the difficulty of starting over with his reputation compromised. "I need time to consider this," he finally said. "You have 24 hours, I replied, standing to indicate our meeting was over. After that, we proceed with option 2. As he reached the door, Drew turned back. "You've changed, Becca." "No," I said quietly. "I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to see it." After he left, Grace entered with a concerned expression. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually." He looked defeated. He's just facing reality, perhaps for the first time. I gathered my documents. "Please let Daniel know I'd like to review the recovery protocols for the misappropriated funds. I think we'll be implementing them soon." True to my prediction, Drew's attorney contacted Marcus the next morning to accept option 3 with minor modifications. The agreement was finalized within 48 hours, and arrangements were made for the return of $800,000, all Drew claimed to still have access to. The remaining amount would be repaid through reduced payments from his consulting contract. With the Drew situation contained, I turned my full attention to rebuilding Summit Digital. The company had survived its first crisis under my leadership, but significant challenges remained. Our development timeline had slipped during the turmoil, and competitors were moving aggressively to capture market share in the emerging patient-centered care space. 3 weeks later, I called an all-hands meeting in the company atrium. All 175 employees gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to anxious. Rumors had been circulating despite our best efforts at transparent communication. "Thank you all for coming," I began, surveying the faces of the people who had helped build Summit. "The past month has brought significant changes to our company, some of which I know have been concerning or confusing." I acknowledged the leadership transition without delving into the personal aspects of Drew's departure, focusing instead on our path forward. Today marks the beginning of Summit Digital's next chapter. I'm pleased to announce we've secured a $5 million investment to accelerate development of our patient engagement platform. This funding will support hiring an additional development team and expanding our client support services. A murmur of relief rippled through the crowd. Additionally, we're implementing a new company structure that better recognizes contributions across all levels. I outlined changes to the equity distribution, profit-sharing program, and promotion pathways that would create more opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than connections. Summit was founded on the belief that technology can transform healthcare delivery and improve patient outcomes. That mission hasn't changed, nor has our commitment to ethical innovation. What has changed is our approach to recognition and reward. Your ideas matter. Your work matters. And going forward, that will be reflected in both our company culture and our compensation structure. As I continued outlining our new direction, I could feel the energy in the room shifting from uncertainty to cautious optimism. People began nodding, exchanging glances, even smiling as the implications of these changes sank in. After the meeting, Tyler Brooks, our lead developer who had always seemed intimidated by Drew, approached me. "Ms. Mitchell, Rebecca, I just wanted to say." He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "I've had this idea for predictive analytics around medication adherence that I tried to present 3 times in the past year, but it never made it past the initial review." "Tell me about it," I said, genuinely interested. For the next 15 minutes, Tyler outlined a brilliant extension to our platform that could significantly improve patient outcomes for those with complex medication regimens. As he spoke, his initial nervousness gave way to passionate expertise. "Have you documented this concept?" I asked when he finished. "Extensively. I have prototypes, research citations, even some preliminary code. I want to see everything. Set up a meeting with Daniel and me for tomorrow. If this is as promising as it sounds, we'll fast-track development and ensure you receive proper credit as the innovation lead." The look of stunned gratitude on Tyler's face said everything about the previous management style at Summit. "Thank you," he said simply. "It feels like things are really changing around here." "They are," I assured him. "We're building the company Summit always should have been." Similar conversations followed throughout the day as employees began cautiously sharing ideas they'd previously kept to themselves, sensing a genuine openness that hadn't existed before. That evening, as I prepared to leave, Grace appeared in my doorway with a small package. "This arrived for you. Security checked it. It's just documents." I thanked her and opened the package after she left. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note from Natalie Pearson. "Found these while organizing my files. Thought you should have them." Curious, I inserted the drive into my computer. It contained dozens of recordings of meetings between Drew and various executives, including several with Natalie herself. I clicked on one from 6 months earlier. "The board doesn't need to know about the development delays." Drew's voice came through clearly. "Just show them the prototype demo. They won't know it's mostly smoke and mirrors." "And when they ask about Rebecca's involvement?" Natalie's voice asked. "Tell them she's focused on technical details, not strategic direction. No one questions it because they all assume she's just the technical support anyway." I stopped the recording, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Part of me was furious at this fresh evidence of Drew's duplicity, but another part felt strangely vindicated. Here was irrefutable proof of what I'd suspected for years: my systematic erasure from Summit's narrative. More importantly, these recordings could be valuable insurance if Drew ever violated our agreement. Natalie's motives in providing them were unclear, perhaps genuine remorse or more likely self-preservation, but the gift was significant nonetheless. The following day brought another surprise. Patricia Kim, one of the board members who had been Drew's strongest supporter, requested a private meeting. "I owe you an apology," she said as soon as my office door closed. "When you presented the evidence against Drew, I was skeptical. I thought you were exaggerating his misconduct to justify a power grab." "What changed your mind?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Two things. First, the financial recovery plan you implemented has already shown remarkable results. Our Q2 projections are looking better than they have in 18 months. She paused. "Second, my son is one of your developers." "Eric Kim?" I asked, recalling the quiet, brilliant programmer who had joined us straight from MIT. "Yes. He called me last night, more excited about work than I've heard him in ages. He said you're creating a culture where ideas matter more than office politics." Patricia leaned forward. "Drew always spoke highly of you, but he positioned you as the technical genius who needed his protection from the harsh realities of business." I couldn't help but laugh. "And you believe that?" "I did," she admitted. "It fit a narrative I've seen played out dozens of times in tech companies. The technical co-founder who lacks business savvy. I should have questioned it, especially given your background." "Water under the bridge," I said, though we both knew it wasn't quite that simple. "What can I do to support your vision for Summit moving forward?" she asked, surprising me with her directness. "Actually, there is something. We're establishing an innovation review committee to evaluate employee ideas and fast-track promising concepts. Having a board member participate would add valuable perspective." Patricia smiled. "I'd be honored, and it might help heal some of the board divisions that emerged during the transition." As she left, I felt another piece of Summit's new structure falling into place. The company was transforming day by day, becoming something stronger and more inclusive than it had been under Drew's leadership. That night, I finally began the process I'd been postponing, moving Drew's remaining personal items out of our home. As I packed books and mementos into boxes, I found myself lingering over photographs from happier times. Our wedding day, the celebration when Summit signed its first major hospital system. Hiking in the Columbia River Gorge when we'd temporarily forgotten our work identities and just enjoyed being together. I didn't regret my actions. Drew had forfeited any claim to my loyalty or compassion when he betrayed me so completely. But I allowed myself to acknowledge the grief for what we might have been if his ambition hadn't corroded his integrity. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Through the peephole, I saw Olivia holding a bottle of wine and takeout bags. "Intervention," she announced when I opened the door. "Grace told me you were planning to spend Friday night packing up your failed marriage alone." "Traitor," I said, with a smile, stepping aside to let her in. "Not a traitor, an ally who cares about your well-being." She surveyed the half-filled boxes. "How's it going?" "Surprisingly okay. More like an archaeological excavation than the emotional minefield I expected." Olivia uncorked the wine and poured 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," she said, raising hers in a toast. "To reclaiming what was always mine," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. As we sat talking into the night, I realized I hadn't felt this lighthearted in years. The weight of constantly proving my value, of quietly managing Drew's ego while doing much of the work that built his reputation. It had all lifted, leaving me free to simply be myself. "You know what's ironic?" I said as we finished the wine. "If Drew had just been honest, if he'd acknowledged my contributions and treated me as a true partner, I would have happily let him be the public face of Summit indefinitely. I never wanted the spotlight. And now?" I considered the question. Now I realize the spotlight isn't about ego or recognition. It's about setting the direction, creating something meaningful, building a culture that reflects your values. Those things matter more than I understood before. "The reluctant CEO," Olivia mused. "Except you're actually brilliant at it." "I'm learning," I admitted. "Every day brings new challenges, but also new confirmations that this is where I'm meant to be." The following Monday, I arrived at Summit to find a delivery waiting on my desk, a beautiful orchid plant with unusual blue-tinged blooms. The card read simply, "A rare variety for a rare leader. The team believes in your vision." Gee. Grace denied organizing it when I thanked her, explaining that various department heads had contributed to the gift. It was a small gesture, but it represented something profound. Acceptance of my leadership on my own terms, not as Drew's replacement, or even his opposite, but as someone with a unique approach to guiding Summit forward. That afternoon, Tyler presented his medication adherence platform to the executive team. The concept was even more impressive than he'd initially described. A predictive system that could identify patients at risk of missing critical medications before problems occurred, potentially saving lives while reducing readmission costs for hospitals. "Development timeline?" I asked after his presentation. 4 months for a beta version we could test with select clients, he estimated. 6 to 8 months for full implementation, depending on staffing. "You'll have whatever resources you need," I promised. "This aligns perfectly with our mission of improving patient outcomes through accessible technology. Daniel will work with you on budget allocation." As the meeting concluded, I realized Summit was evolving faster and more organically than I had dared hope. Drew's shadow was fading, replaced by an emerging culture of collaboration and innovation. The company he had tried to hollow out and replicate was instead flourishing without him, proving that his vision had always been more limited than he realized. That night, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Summit's stock up 4% today after rumors of innovative patient adherence technology. Impressive recovery." Natalie, monitoring our progress from a distance. I didn't respond, but I couldn't help appreciating the acknowledgement from someone who had once been positioned as my replacement. Her ambition had been misdirected by Drew, but perhaps there was a lesson there too. Talent without ethics was ultimately self-defeating. As I drove home through the rain-slicked streets of Portland, I found myself looking forward rather than backward for the first time since discovering Drew's betrayal. The path ahead was challenging but clear, building Summit into the company it was always meant to be, one where innovation served a greater purpose than profit alone. The coastal cabin I had once seen as an escape now felt like a reminder of resilience, a place where the constant storms only made the foundation stronger. Perhaps Summit would follow the same pattern, emerging from this turbulence more solid than before. Drew had intended to take everything I valued, but in his greed and arrogance, he had instead given me the opportunity to reclaim not just my company, but my voice. The woman he had underestimated now sat in his chair, guiding his company toward a future he hadn't been visionary enough to imagine. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies give you is the chance to discover strengths you never knew you possessed. In trying to reduce me to nothing, Drew had inadvertently revealed everything I could be. 6 months into my leadership at Summit Digital, the company had found its rhythm under my direction. The halls buzzed with collaborative energy as teams worked across departments in ways they never had before. Our stock had not only recovered from the initial drop after Drew's departure, but had climbed 12% beyond its previous high, buoyed by the successful launch of Tyler's medication adherence platform and renewed investor confidence. The morning sun streamed through my office windows as I reviewed the final preparations for the Pacific Northwest Healthcare Conference, where Summit would unveil our next generation of patient care technology. This annual gathering of healthcare systems, technology providers, and medical professionals had always been Drew's moment to shine, his stage for grand announcements and charismatic networking. This year, I would take that stage instead. Grace knocked lightly on my open door. "Your 9:30 is here." "Send her in," I replied, closing my laptop. Eliza Watkins, our newly promoted Chief Marketing Officer, entered with the confident stride that had made her my choice to replace Natalie. Unlike her predecessor, Eliza had earned her position through exceptional work and strategic thinking rather than personal connections. "The presentation deck is finalized," she announced, handing me a tablet. "I've incorporated the case studies from Memorial Hospital showing the 22% reduction in readmissions since implementing our adherence platform." I scrolled through the slides, impressed by how she'd balanced technical details with compelling patient outcome narratives. "This is excellent, Eliza. Much stronger than our usual conference material." "That's because we're leading with results instead of promises," she said with a smile. Drew's approach was always to create excitement about future possibilities. We're showing what we've actually accomplished. The casual mention of Drew no longer created tension in these conversations. He had become simply a previous chapter in Summit's story, referenced occasionally, but no longer defining our identity. "Speaking of accomplishments," I said, "I'd like you to present the adherence platform results yourself. You worked closely with Tyler's team on the implementation strategy, and you deserve recognition for that contribution." Surprise flickered across her face. "I'd be honored, but this is your first major conference as CEO. Are you sure you want to share the spotlight?" "Summit's success isn't about any single person," I replied. "That was Drew's mistake, believing he needed to be the hero of every story. Our strength comes from showcasing the brilliant minds throughout our organization." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "That's why morale has improved so dramatically. People feel seen." After finalizing the conference details, I turned my attention to our quarterly financial review. The transformation of Summit's financial systems had been among my first priorities, with Daniel implementing rigorous controls and transparency measures that made the kind of manipulation Drew had engaged in virtually impossible. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Mitchell, there's a Victor Ramirez here to see you." I frowned slightly. Victor, one of our board members and formerly Drew's staunch ally, had been notably absent from recent meetings, sending a junior partner from his venture capital firm as his proxy. "Send him in." Victor entered with less of his usual swagger, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. At 57, he still maintained the athletic build of the college football player he'd once been, but today he seemed diminished somehow. "Rebecca," he greeted me, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "You're looking well. Success agrees with you." "Thank you, Victor. What brings you by today? The board meeting isn't until next week." He clasped his hands together, leaning forward. "I'll be direct. I'm considering selling my shares in Summit Digital." This was unexpected. Victor's venture capital firm held nearly 8% of Summit's stock, making them our third largest shareholder, after me and our institutional investors. "May I ask why?" "Our performance has been exceptionally strong this quarter." "It's not about performance," he admitted. "It's about optics." "Optics?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. When Drew approached me 3 years ago about investing in Summit, he presented himself as the visionary behind the company's technology. I later learned, too late, that he had significantly misrepresented his contributions relative to yours. I kept my expression neutral, waiting for him to continue. "Several of my limited partners have raised concerns about my judgment in that investment. They're questioning whether I performed adequate due diligence or simply relied on my friendship with Drew." Now, I understood. Victor's reputation as a savvy tech investor was at stake. Being associated with Drew's deception had become a liability. "I see," I said carefully. "And you believe divesting from Summit now would help restore confidence in your judgment?" "Ironically, yes, despite Summit's current success." He gave a humorless laugh. "My partners would rather see me acknowledge the mistake in backing Drew than continue holding shares, even profitable ones." I considered his dilemma. Victor had indeed supported Drew during the initial board conflict, but he had eventually voted to confirm my leadership once the evidence became irrefutable. His firm's investment had also provided critical capital during Summit's early growth phase. "Before you make that decision, I have a counter-proposal," I said. "Instead of selling your shares, why not change the narrative?" "What do you mean?" "Join me on stage at the Pacific Northwest Healthcare Conference next week. We'll announce a new investment initiative focused on enhancing our predictive analytics capabilities, technology that aligns with your firm's investment thesis in healthcare AI." Victor looked skeptical. "And how does that help my situation?" It repositions your involvement with Summit as forward-looking rather than tainted by past association. You're not Drew's friend who got duped. You're a strategic investor who recognizes Summit's technological leadership regardless of who sits in the CEO's chair." He considered this, a calculating look I recognized from board negotiations crossing his face. "The optics would be better," he acknowledged. "But it would require an additional investment from my firm to be credible." "Naturally. We're preparing a Series C funding round to support expansion into the European market. Your firm could take a lead position, demonstrating confidence in Summit's current direction." By the time Victor left my office, we had outlined the framework for an announcement that would benefit both Summit and his reputation. It was the kind of strategic alliance built on mutual interest rather than personal loyalty, the approach I'd found most effective in rebuilding Summit's network of relationships. Grace appeared in my doorway after he departed. "That looked intense. Everything okay?" "Actually, yes. Victor may become an unexpected ally." I checked my watch. "Is the development team ready for our review session?" "They're waiting in the innovation lab, and Daniel mentioned he has updates on the recovery efforts for the remaining misappropriated funds." The innovation lab was a recent addition to Summit's headquarters, a collaborative space designed to break down the hierarchical barriers that had defined the company under Drew's leadership. Walking through the main work areas to reach it, I exchanged greetings with employees who no longer fell silent when the CEO approached. The lab was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Tyler Brooks and his team had transformed a concept into a functioning platform in record time, their enthusiasm evident in the animated discussions around various workstations. "Rebecca," Tyler called out, waving me over to a large display. "We've just completed the integration with hospital electronic health records. Want to see it in action?" For the next hour, I immersed myself in the technical details of our newest innovation. Unlike Drew, who would have nodded vaguely before steering conversations toward marketing potential, I asked specific questions about implementation challenges and algorithmic improvements. The team responded with growing excitement, clearly appreciating a leader who understood the complexities of what they were building. As we wrapped up, Daniel Wilson pulled me aside. "We've traced another portion of the missing funds," he said quietly. "About $180,000 was used as a down payment on a property in Seattle registered to a holding company. Records show Drew is the beneficial owner. Can we recover it? Our attorneys are filing the paperwork now. Given the clear evidence that he used misappropriated company funds, we have a strong case for placing a lien on the property." I nodded, satisfied with the progress. "And the consulting arrangement?" Daniel grimaced slightly. "Drew has fulfilled the minimum requirements of the contract, but his contributions have been uninspired. It's clear his heart isn't in it. As long as he's complying with the terms, that's what matters. The arrangement was always about recovery and containment, not leveraging his talents." Later that afternoon, I met with Marcus to review our strategy for the upcoming shareholder meeting. Summit's transformation had largely proceeded smoothly, but there remained a faction of investors who had personal ties to Drew and questioned the new direction. "The quarterly results will help," Marcus noted, reviewing the financial highlights. "A 28% increase in recurring revenue is difficult to argue with." "Numbers aren't always enough," I replied. "Some of these relationships go back decades. They trusted Drew because they knew him, not because he delivered the best results." "Which is why your leadership style is so effective in contrast," Marcus observed. "Transparency and consistent performance build a different kind of trust, one based on evidence rather than charisma." As we finished our meeting, my phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Turn on Channel 8 News now." I reached for the remote control on my credenza, switching on the office television. The screen showed Drew standing at a podium in what appeared to be a press conference. The headline beneath him read, "Former tech CEO announces new healthcare venture. Revita Care Technologies will revolutionize the way providers interact with patients," Drew was saying, his familiar charismatic delivery unchanged. "Our proprietary platform leverages cutting-edge analytics to predict care outcomes in ways current solutions simply cannot match." Marcus frowned. "This directly violates the non-compete agreement." I raised my hand, signaling him to wait as Drew continued. "Some may wonder how this differs from existing healthcare technology," Drew acknowledged with the practiced humility he'd always deployed effectively. "The key distinction is our focus on social determinants of health, factors beyond clinical data that significantly impact patient well-being. This represents an entirely new category of healthcare technology." The camera panned to show a small group of people standing behind Drew, and I immediately recognized Jeremy Phillips, his college roommate who had received the suspicious consulting payments Daniel had uncovered. "He's positioning this as different enough to skirt the non-compete," I murmured. "Clever. But is it legal?" Marcus asked. "That's what we need to determine." I turned off the television. "Get me everything you can on Revita Care Technologies, corporate filings, press materials, product descriptions. Let's see exactly what they're building." Within hours, our legal team had assembled a comprehensive briefing on Drew's new venture. Revita Care had been incorporated 3 months earlier, with initial funding from a group of private investors, several of whom had connections to Summit but had never invested in us directly. The company described its mission as extending beyond traditional healthcare technology to address the social and environmental factors influencing patient outcomes. It's carefully worded to appear distinct from Summit's focus, Marcus noted, as we reviewed the materials in my office that evening. But the underlying technology would necessarily overlap with our predictive analytics platform. I studied the product outline, recognizing elements that reminded me of concepts Drew and I had discussed years earlier but never implemented. The question is whether this constitutes a breach of the non-compete, which prohibits him from developing substantially similar technology to Summit's core offerings. It's a gray area, Marcus admitted. We could file for an injunction, but litigation would be costly and potentially damaging to both companies. The court battles could overshadow the actual work. I thought about the implications of each option. A legal challenge would thrust Drew's betrayal back into public view, just as Summit was establishing its independent identity. It would also divert resources and attention away from our growth initiatives at a critical time. What if we took a different approach? I suggested. Instead of fighting RevitaCare directly, we accelerate the development of our own social determinants module. We have the data infrastructure, the hospital relationships, and most importantly, a proven platform to build upon. Marcus looked thoughtful. Beat them to market with a superior product, rather than blocking them with legal maneuvers. Exactly. Drew is starting from scratch with limited healthcare data. We're already embedded in hospital systems across the country, with access to anonymized patient outcome information that would take him years to accumulate. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Tyler's development team and our strategic planning group. Without mentioning Drew or RevitaCare by name, I outlined a vision for expanding our platform to incorporate social determinants of health. This isn't a new direction, I clarified. It's the natural evolution of our predictive analytics capabilities. The ability to incorporate non-clinical factors like transportation access, food security, and social support into our algorithms would give providers a more comprehensive view of patient needs. Tyler immediately grasped the potential. We've already built the foundation for this. The adherence platform considers some environmental factors in its predictions. Expanding that framework to include broader social determinants would be challenging but doable. Timeline? I asked. He exchanged glances with his lead engineers. 4 months for a basic implementation if we prioritize it. 6 to 7 for something comprehensive. I want a preliminary version ready to demo at the conference next week, I said, drawing surprised looks. Not a full implementation, but enough to show our direction convincingly. That's aggressive, Tyler said carefully. It is, I acknowledged. But I believe this team can deliver. Pull whatever resources you need from other projects. I'll handle the reprioritization with the affected departments. As the team dispersed to begin work, Daniel lingered behind. This is about Drew's announcement, isn't it? It's about Summit staying ahead of market trends, I replied evenly. But yes, the timing is strategic. Daniel nodded, understanding the subtext. He's still trying to take what you built. The difference is, this time I see it coming. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Summit mobilized around the Accelerated Development Initiative. I made a point of visiting the team. Daily, bringing food for late-night sessions and occasionally rolling up my sleeves to help debug problematic code sections, something Drew would never have done or been capable of doing. 3 days before the conference, Tyler and his team invited me to the Innovation Lab for a preview of their work. The demo they presented exceeded my expectations. A sophisticated visualization showing how factors like neighborhood safety, access to healthy food, and transportation availability correlated with medication adherence and hospital readmission rates. This is remarkable, I said, watching as the system processed a simulated patient profile and generated personalized risk assessments. You've accomplished in days what would normally take months. It helps when your CEO actually understands the technology, one of the younger developers commented, then looked embarrassed by her frankness. I smiled. That understanding goes both ways. I've learned more from watching this team work than you might realize. The night before the conference, I sat alone in my office reviewing my presentation one final time. The Pacific Northwest Healthcare Conference would be attended by every major player in the healthcare technology space, as well as hospital administrators and clinicians from across the country. The stakes were high, but I felt prepared in a way that went beyond having memorized talking points. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Heard about your conference presentation tomorrow. Interesting timing. Good luck with that. D. Drew, attempting to unsettle me before my major public debut as Summit's CEO. In the past, such a message might have worked, making me question myself or worry about his next move. Now it merely confirmed I was on the right track. I deleted the message without responding and returned to my presentation. The conference center buzzed with energy the next morning as thousands of healthcare professionals gathered for the opening sessions. Summit's booth in the exhibition hall had been redesigned under my direction, shifting from the flashy displays Drew had favored to an interactive experience where visitors could see our technology in action. Impressive turnout, Victor commented, joining me as we prepared for our joint presentation. He had followed through on our agreement, committing his firm to lead Summit's next funding round. The healthcare technology sector is booming, I replied. Everyone is looking for solutions that improve outcomes while reducing costs. Speaking of which, Victor lowered his voice. Did you see that Drew managed to secure a last-minute speaking slot this afternoon? He's presenting RevitaCare in the Innovation Showcase. I hadn't known this, but I kept my expression neutral. Good. It will make for an interesting comparison when people see both presentations. Victor studied me with newfound respect. You're not what I expected, Rebecca. When Drew first brought you to board meetings, he portrayed you as the technical genius who needed protection from the business side of things. A convenient narrative for him, I observed. One that allowed him to take credit for my innovations while portraying himself as my champion. Well, I was wrong to buy into it, Victor admitted. Your leadership these past 6 months has been more effective than his ever was. As we took our places backstage before the presentation, I caught sight of Drew in the audience, seated prominently, in the center section. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small, challenging nod. Once, that silent communication would have been between conspirators, a shared acknowledgement of our united front. Now, it carried an entirely different meaning. The moderator's voice broke through my thoughts. Please welcome to the stage Rebecca Mitchell, CEO of Summit Digital Solutions, and Victor Ramirez of Elevation Ventures, discussing breakthrough innovations in predictive healthcare analytics. The audience applauded as we walked onto the stage. Looking out at the sea of faces, hospital administrators who made purchasing decisions, clinicians who would use our technology, competitors evaluating our every word, I felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Drew had always thrived in these moments, feeding off the crowd's energy. Would I? But as I began speaking, I found my own rhythm, more measured than Drew's flamboyant style, but authoritative and engaging in its own way. I didn't need to mimic his approach to be effective. Healthcare technology often focuses exclusively on clinical data, I explained. But patients are whole people whose health is affected by countless factors beyond what's captured in traditional medical records. The presentation flowed smoothly as I introduced Summit's expanded vision, seamlessly transitioning to Eliza's portion highlighting real-world results, then to Victor's announcement of the Strategic Investment Initiative. The audience responded with increasing enthusiasm, particularly when Tyler demonstrated the social determinants module live on stage. During the Q&A session, a hospital CIO asked the question I had been expecting. How does this approach differ from the social determinants platform announced by RevitaCare Technologies? I could feel Drew's gaze intensify from the audience, waiting to see how I would respond. Innovation in healthcare rarely follows a linear path, I replied. Multiple companies recognizing the importance of social factors in patient care is actually validation of the concept's significance. The difference lies in implementation and integration. Summit's approach builds upon our established platform, which is already embedded in hospital workflows across the country. This isn't a standalone solution, but an enhancement to a proven system that clinicians already trust and use daily. The answer struck the perfect balance, acknowledging RevitaCare without diminishing it directly, while highlighting Summit's competitive advantages in a way that resonated with the hospital, administrators, and the audience. As we concluded to enthusiastic applause, I noticed several people who had been seated near Drew now approaching our team with business cards in hand. The message was clear. Summit was leading this innovation space, not following. In the exhibition hall afterward, our booth was constantly surrounded by interested attendees. I made a point of staying accessible, engaging directly with potential clients rather than retreating to VIP lounges as Drew would have done. Ms. Mitchell, a woman in a lab coat, approached, extending her hand. Dr. Helen Rivera, Chief Medical Officer at Memorial Healthcare. Your adherence platform has transformed our readmission rates for chronic disease patients. That's wonderful to hear, I replied, genuinely pleased. Tyler Brooks, who leads our development team, is right over there if you'd like to share. Specific feedback. He's always looking for ways to improve the system based on clinical experience. Dr. Rivera looked surprised at the suggestion. Your predecessor wasn't particularly interested in that kind of ground-level input. He preferred to tell us how the technology would change our practice rather than asking how it actually performed in the field. Different leadership styles, I said diplomatically. Summit now believes that the best innovations come from collaboration between technology developers and the healthcare professionals who use our systems daily. Late in the afternoon, I made a point of attending Drew's presentation in the Innovation Showcase. I sat in the back row, observing as he unveiled RevitaCare's vision with his characteristic charisma. The content was polished, but noticeably light, on technical specifics, promising revolutionary insights without demonstrating actual functionality. What struck me most was how familiar it all felt. The grandiose claims, the carefully choreographed demonstrations, the emphasis on future potential rather than current capabilities. It was Drew's standard approach, effective in generating excitement, but ultimately promising more than he could deliver. As attendees filed out afterward, I overheard fragments of conversations comparing the two presentations. Summit's solution is already implemented in actual hospitals, and RevitaCare sounds impressive, but can they actually deliver? I slipped out before Drew could spot me, satisfied that Summit's position remained secure. We had demonstrated not just innovation, but proof. The difference between promising a revolution and actually creating one. That evening, Summit hosted a reception for key clients and partners at a rooftop venue overlooking the city. The atmosphere was celebratory as early feedback from the conference confirmed we had made a significant impression. To Summit's continued success, Victor proposed a toast, raising his glass. And to leadership that values substance over spectacle. The gathering represented the new Summit I had built, collaborative, transparent, focused on genuine innovation rather than personality. As I circulated among our guests, I was struck by how many conversations centered on specific technical capabilities or implementation strategies rather than vague promises of disruption. My phone buzzed with a text message from Grace. Drew is in the lobby asking to speak with you. Security awaiting instructions. I excused myself and stepped away from the group. This was unexpected. Drew had avoided direct contact since accepting the consulting arrangement. After a moment's consideration, I texted back, "Send him up, but have security nearby." Minutes later, Drew emerged from the elevator, looking slightly out of place among Summit's celebration. He had lost weight since I'd last seen him up close, and there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested stress. "Rebecca," he acknowledged, with a nod. "Impressive presentation today." "Thank you. Yours was familiar." A flash of irritation crossed his face before he masked it with a smile. "May we speak privately?" I led him to a quieter corner of the rooftop, still within view of the main gathering but out of earshot. "What can I do for you, Drew?" He surveyed the successful event before answering. "You've done well with Summit. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest." "Is that why you came? To offer backhanded compliments?" Drew sighed. "I came to propose a truce. This public competition between Summit and Revitacare benefits neither of us. The market perceives us as duplicating efforts, which devalues both companies." I studied him carefully. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "A technology sharing agreement. Summit focuses on its established hospital integration platforms. Revitacare develops the social determinants analytics. We present it as complementary technologies rather than competing solutions." The proposal was surprisingly rational, even potentially beneficial from a purely business perspective. But I knew Drew too well to take it at face value. "And what would this agreement require from Summit?" "Access to anonymized patient data from your hospital partnerships, a joint development committee, co-branded marketing for the integrated solution." Now I understood. Revitacare lacked what Summit had in abundance: real-world healthcare data and established hospital relationships. Drew wasn't proposing a truce. He was seeking access to Summit's most valuable assets. "That's an interesting proposition," I said carefully. "But I have to wonder, if integration and cooperation are so valuable, why did you launch a competing company rather than continuing to work with Summit under our consulting arrangement?" Drew's expression hardened slightly. "We both know that arrangement was designed to constrain rather than utilize my capabilities. It was designed to recover misappropriated funds while allowing you to maintain professional credibility," I corrected. "A considerable accommodation given the circumstances." He glanced out at the Portland skyline, gathering his thoughts. "Look, Rebecca, what happened between us was regrettable. But continuing this corporate rivalry serves no one. Together, we built something remarkable at Summit. We could do so again, just with clearer boundaries." For a brief moment, I felt the pull of our shared history, the early days of Summit when we had truly been partners, before ambition and betrayal corrupted what we'd built. But those days were irretrievably gone, destroyed not by my actions, but by his. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally. "But Summit will continue on its current path. Our social determinants platform is already in development, with beta testing, scheduled to begin next month. If Revitacare finds a different niche in the healthcare technology ecosystem, I wish you success there." Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly replaced by the calculating look I knew well. "You realize this means direct competition. Revitacare will be targeting your client base, offering more innovative solutions." "Competition drives innovation," I replied evenly. "Summit welcomes it. Though I would remind you that your non-compete agreement has specific limitations regarding our core technology. Our legal team is monitoring Revitacare's offerings closely." Drew straightened, any pretense of reconciliation vanishing. "Always the careful one. With contracts and contingencies in place, that hasn't changed." "No," I agreed. "What's changed is that now I'm using those skills to protect what's mine, not to quietly support your ambitions." He turned to leave, then paused. "You've become more like me than you realize, Rebecca. The woman I married would never have been so coldly calculating." "The woman you married was always capable of this," I corrected him. "You just never bothered to see it until it was directed at you instead of on your behalf." After he departed, I rejoined the celebration, pushing the encounter from my mind. Drew's attempt to regain access to Summit's resources only confirmed that RevitaCare was struggling to gain traction without the foundation he had tried to steal from my company. As the evening wound down, Daniel approached with a concerned expression. "Everything okay?" We saw Drew leave looking rather unhappy. "Everything's fine," I assured him. "Just an unsuccessful fishing expedition for Summit's data resources." Daniel shook his head. "Some people never change." "No," I agreed, "but sometimes the world around them does." Later that night, as I stood on the balcony of my hotel room overlooking the city lights, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed in just 6 months. The betrayal that had shattered my marriage had also freed me from its constraints, allowing me to step fully into leadership rather than remaining in Drew's shadow. Summit Digital was thriving not despite Drew's departure, but because of it. Because his absence had created space for collaborative innovation and authentic leadership to flourish. The company he had tried to hollow out and replicate was instead evolving beyond anything he had envisioned. My phone chimed with an email notification from Tyler. "Team celebrating breakthrough on social determinants module. Ahead of schedule. This is going to change everything." I smiled, composing a quick reply of congratulations before turning back to the view. Drew had been right about one thing at least. I had changed. But not into someone like him. Rather, I had finally become fully myself, no longer diminished by his narrative of who I was and what I could achieve. The woman who had once stood in the background while her husband took credit for her innovations now led the company they had built together, steering it toward a future more successful than either of them had imagined. And if that transformation had begun with betrayal, it would be defined by something far more powerful: the reclamation of my own potential, finally unleashed without constraints. In the end, the keys I had handed to Drew's mistress hadn't just unlocked a company, they had unlocked a version of myself I might never have discovered otherwise. The ultimate irony was that in trying to replace me, Drew had instead revealed just how irreplaceable I truly was. 1 year after taking control of Summit Digital Solutions, I stood at the podium of the National Healthcare Innovation Awards, accepting the Breakthrough Technology of the Year honor for our integrated social determinants platform. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly the kind of recognition Drew had always craved but never achieved during his tenure as CEO. "This award belongs to the entire Summit team," I told the audience of industry leaders and healthcare professionals. "Particularly to our development group led by Tyler Brooks, who transformed a complex concept into an intuitive system that's already improving patient outcomes across the country." The applause that followed felt like validation of every difficult decision I'd made since discovering Drew's betrayal. Summit had not just survived the transition, it had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, including my own. Later that evening, as I mingled at the post-ceremony reception, I overheard 2 hospital administrators discussing RevitaCare technologies. "Shame about their latest funding round falling through," one commented. "The concept had potential. Too much competition from established players," the other replied. "Summit's platform already does everything RevitaCare promised to develop eventually. Why take a risk on an unproven system?" I moved away before they noticed me, not wanting to appear to be gloating over my ex-husband's struggles. The truth was, I took no pleasure in RevitaCare's difficulties. Business wasn't personal, a lesson Drew had never fully understood despite his frequent claims to the contrary. My phone vibrated with a message from Daniel Wilson. "Board presentation tomorrow." At 10. Acquisition proposal document just arrived from Meridian Health Systems. Thoughts? Meridian was one of the largest healthcare providers in the country, operating over 70 hospitals across 12 states. Their interest in acquiring Summit had been growing over the past 3 months as our technology demonstrated increasingly impressive results in clinical settings. "Reviewing now," I replied. "Let's schedule a preliminary discussion before the board meeting. 8 a.m.? Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to examine Meridian's proposal. Their offer was substantial, nearly triple Summit's valuation from when I took over, and included provisions for our executive team to remain intact, leading Summit as a wholly owned subsidiary with expanded resources. A year ago, such an offer would have seemed like the ultimate victory. Now I found myself weighing the opportunities and constraints with careful consideration. Meridian's resources could accelerate our development timeline and expand our implementation to hundreds more hospitals. But corporate acquisition also meant sacrificing the independence that had allowed Summit to move so nimbly under my leadership. As I contemplated these trade-offs, my phone rang. Olivia calling from Portland. "How does it feel to be an award-winning CEO?" she asked when I answered. "Surprising," I admitted. I never envisioned myself in this role, much less receiving industry recognition for it. "That's because Drew spent years convincing you to play a supporting role in your own life story." The directness of her observation made me smile. Olivia had never been one to soften difficult truths. "Speaking of your ex, have you heard the latest? About RevitaCare's funding issues? I overheard something at the reception. Not just funding issues, complete collapse. They're shuttering operations. Next week." Jeremy Phillips leaked the news to industry contacts this afternoon, apparently trying to distance himself before the official announcement. The news shouldn't have affected me, but I felt an unexpected pang of something like sympathy. Drew had genuinely believed in RevitaCare's potential, however flawed his approach to realizing it had been. "What happens to their technology?" I asked, professional curiosity overriding personal history. "That's the interesting part. Word is they've developed some innovative patient engagement modules that work from a different angle than Summit's approach. Their implementation was problematic, but the core concept has merit. Several companies are circling to acquire the intellectual property in the bankruptcy proceedings." I thanked Olivia for the update and promised to tell her about the acquisition offer when I returned to Portland. After we hung up, I returned to Meridian's proposal with fresh perspective. What if Summit acquired RevitaCare's intellectual property instead of becoming an acquisition target ourselves? It was almost midnight when I emailed Marcus Thompson with the question, what would be involved in Summit bidding for RevitaCare's assets during bankruptcy proceedings? His response came within minutes despite the late hour. Complicated given your personal history with the founder. Would require careful disclosure and recusal protocols to avoid conflict of interest claims, but potentially viable with proper governance. Let's discuss in the morning. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking with renewed clarity about Summit's path forward. By the time I met Daniel for our pre-board discussion, I had outlined an alternative strategy to Meridian's acquisition offer. "You want to acquire RevitaCare instead of being acquired by Meridian?" Daniel looked stunned as I explained my thinking. The board was excited about Meridian's offer. "This is a complete reversal." "Not a reversal," I corrected. "An alternative that maintains our independence while strategically expanding our technological capabilities. RevitaCare's patient engagement approach complements our existing platform. Together, they could create an integrated system more valuable than either component alone." Daniel frowned. "That makes sense from a technology standpoint, but the optics are problematic. You acquiring your ex-husband's failed company could appear vindictive or personal. Which is why I would recuse myself from the negotiations completely. You, Marcus, and the board would handle the entire process. I'd have no input on valuation or terms. Even with those safeguards, people will talk." "Let them," I said firmly. "Summit's decisions should be based on business value, not concerns about gossip or appearances. If RevitaCare's technology enhances our offering, that benefits our shareholders and clients regardless of who founded the company." By the time we presented both options to the board that afternoon, Daniel had moved. From skeptical to cautiously supportive of my approach. The board's reaction was mixed. Patricia Kim and 2 other directors immediately recognized the strategic potential, while Victor Ramirez and the more financially oriented members were reluctant to pass on Meridian's generous offer. Meridian offers certainty, Victor argued, a substantial return for shareholders with minimal risk. Acquiring a failed competitor's technology is speculative at best. But it preserves our independence, Patricia countered. Under Rebecca's leadership, Summit has outperformed every growth projection. Why put a ceiling on that potential by becoming someone else's subsidiary? The debate continued for nearly 2 hours before the board finally reached a decision. We would pursue both paths simultaneously. Summit would make a modest bid for RevitaCare's intellectual property while continuing acquisition discussions with Meridian. The final direction would depend on which option proved more advantageous as negotiations progressed. It was a pragmatic compromise, but left me with complicated governance challenges. To maintain proper separation, I appointed Daniel to lead the RevitaCare asset acquisition team while I continued discussions with Meridian. Each team would operate independently with separate legal counsel and report directly to the board. 3 days later, I returned to Portland to find Summit buzzing with rumors about both potential deals. Grace met me at the office with a carefully neutral expression that told me something significant had happened during my absence. "What is it?" I asked as soon as we were alone in my office. "Drew called yesterday," she said. "He was quite insistent about speaking with you directly." "About the bankruptcy proceedings?" "He wouldn't say specifically, just that it was a personal matter requiring immediate attention." I considered ignoring the contact entirely, but experience had taught me that Drew rarely gave up once he'd decided on a course of action. Better to address whatever this was directly than have it become a distraction during critical negotiations. "Call him back," I instructed. "Offer a 15-minute meeting tomorrow morning here at Summit. Make it clear this is a one-time courtesy." The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for what would be our first direct conversation in months. Drew had maintained minimal contact through his consulting arrangement, which had formally ended 6 weeks earlier when he failed to meet delivery requirements for the final phase. At precisely 9 a.m., Grace escorted him into my office. He looked tired but composed, dressed in the casual but expensive style he had always favored for non-presentation workdays. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, taking a seat across from my desk. "I know this is unusual given our circumstances." "What can I do for you, Drew?" I kept my tone professional, neither friendly nor hostile. He took a deep breath. "I've heard Summit is considering bidding on RevitaCare's intellectual property." "The board is evaluating several strategic options," I replied carefully. "I've recused myself from any decisions regarding RevitaCare to avoid conflicts of interest." "I appreciate that," he said, surprising me with his reasonableness. "I'm not here to contest any potential acquisition. In fact, I think Summit would be the ideal steward for what we built at RevitaCare." This was unexpected. I had anticipated anger, perhaps accusations of vindictiveness or attempts to undermine his new venture. Instead, he seemed almost resigned. "Then why are you here?" "To provide context that might not be apparent from the bankruptcy filings." He placed a flash drive on my desk. "This contains the complete development history of RevitaCare's patient engagement system, including elements that aren't documented in the formal IP portfolio. If Summit acquires the technology, this information would significantly accelerate integration with your existing platform." I made no move to take the drive. "Why would you give this to Summit?" A flicker of the old Drew, charming, persuasive, slightly manipulative, crossed his face. "Let's call it a gesture of good faith. RevitaCare's failure doesn't mean the technology should be lost or implemented incorrectly by whoever acquires it." "And there's nothing else you want in exchange for this information? No conditions or requests?" He hesitated before answering. "Just one thing. If Summit does acquire Revitacare's IP, I'd like the development team to be considered for positions. They're talented people who committed to a vision that failed because of funding issues, not because of their capabilities. The request seemed reasonable on its face, but I knew Drew well enough to suspect deeper motivations. Including Jeremy Phillips? Jeremy's already accepted a position elsewhere, Drew replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. He was quick to abandon ship when funding problems emerged. Just as Natalie had quickly distanced herself when Drew's position at Summit became untenable. He had a talent for inspiring initial loyalty, but rarely inspired the deeper commitment that sustained people through difficult times. I can't make any promises about hiring decisions, I said. That would be up to the integration team if an acquisition occurs, but I can ensure their applications receive fair consideration. Drew nodded, apparently satisfied with this limited commitment. That's all I ask. As he stood to leave, I found myself curious about his next steps. What about you, Drew? What comes after Revitacare? A shadow passed over his face. I don't know yet. 18 months ago, I had everything figured out. A successful company, a clear path forward, a life that made sense. Now I'm starting over at 43. For a moment, I glimpsed the real cost of his betrayal. Not just the company and marriage he'd lost, but the self-image that had collapsed. With them, Drew had always defined himself through external validation. His position, his influence, the admiration of others. Without those markers of success, who was he? You're resilient, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. You'll find your way forward. A complicated expression crossed his face. Gratitude mingled with regret. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might realize. After he left, I examined the flash drive carefully before asking our security team to scan it for any malicious code. Finding none, I reviewed the contents briefly before forwarding everything to Daniel with a note explaining its source and potential value. The encounter left me unsettled in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seeing Drew humbled, offering assistance, without obvious ulterior motives, challenged the narrative I had constructed around our separation. It was easier to think of him as simply selfish and manipulative, rather than as a complex person capable of both terrible betrayal and genuine remorse. That evening, I called Marcus to update him on the meeting and discuss its potential implications for the Revitacare acquisition. It's unusual but not unprecedented for a founder to support acquisition of their failed venture's assets, Marcus observed, especially when the alternative might be seeing the technology broken up or implemented poorly by a less suitable acquirer. So you think his motives could be genuinely about preserving the technology rather than some hidden agenda? I asked. People are rarely motivated by single factors, Marcus replied. Drew likely wants to salvage something positive from Revitacare's failure, whether that's the technology itself, positions for his team, or simply a more dignified conclusion to the venture than complete collapse. After our call, I found myself standing at the window of my home office, looking out at the garden I had reclaimed and redesigned after Drew moved out. The careful structure he had imposed, geometric hedges and symmetrical plantings, had been replaced with a more natural landscape that changed with the seasons and required less constant maintenance. It struck me as an apt metaphor for Summit's transformation. Drew had created a company that reflected his personality, impressive but rigid, requiring constant attention to maintain its polished facade. Under my leadership, Summit had evolved into an organization that adapted more naturally to changing conditions, drawing strength from the diverse talents of its people rather than the vision of a single charismatic leader. The next 3 weeks brought intense parallel negotiations as Summit pursued both the Meridian acquisition discussion and the Revitacare asset purchase. Though I remained officially separated from the Revitacare proceedings, Daniel kept me informed of major developments. The bankruptcy court had approved Summit's initial bid, but two other healthcare technology companies had entered competing offers, driving up the potential purchase price. Meanwhile, my discussions with Meridian had progressed to final terms. Their offer remained generous but included increasingly stringent integration requirements that would effectively dissolve Summit's independent operation within 18 months of acquisition. Each conversation made it clearer that despite their promise of autonomy, Meridian viewed Summit primarily as a technology acquisition rather than as a continuing innovation partner. The decision point came during a marathon board meeting on a rainy Thursday in April. Daniel presented the final bid package for RevitaCare's assets, significantly higher than our initial offer, but still within Summit's financial capabilities. I followed with Meridian's latest terms, which included accelerated integration timelines and reduced guarantees for Summit's executive team. "We're at a philosophical crossroads," I told the board after both presentations concluded. "Do we capture certain value by selling to Meridian, or do we invest in continued independence and growth potential by acquiring RevitaCare's complementary technology?" Victor Ramirez, who had initially favored the Meridian offer, surprised me by speaking first. When we began these discussions, I saw Meridian as the safer choice, but their evolving terms reveal their true intentions: to absorb Summit's innovations while gradually dismantling what makes this company special. Patricia Kim nodded in agreement. "The culture Rebecca has built here is as valuable as the technology itself. That's something Meridian clearly doesn't understand or value appropriately." The board's perspective had shifted remarkably during the negotiation process. Having seen how Meridian's promises of autonomy eroded with each revision, even the most financially conservative directors now questioned whether the acquisition truly served Summit's best interests. After 2 hours of deliberation, the board voted unanimously to proceed with the RevitaCare asset acquisition and formally end discussions with Meridian. As Chairman Jonathan Weber put it, Summit's greatest value lies in its future potential, not its current balance sheet. We're betting on ourselves. The decision felt like a watershed moment, Summit definitively choosing its own path forward, rather than becoming another corporate acquisition story. As the meeting concluded, Victor pulled me aside with an unexpected observation. "You know what's remarkable about all this?" he said. "A year ago, Drew was trying to replicate Summit's technology to compete against you. Now, we're acquiring what he built to strengthen the company he tried to undermine. There's a certain poetic justice in that outcome." I smiled, but offered a slight correction. "It's not about justice, poetic or otherwise. It's about recognizing value wherever it exists and making decisions based on future potential rather than past history." Victor studied me with newfound respect. "That distinction is precisely why you've succeeded where Drew ultimately failed." The acquisition of RevitaCare's intellectual property closed 3 weeks later, adding their innovative patient engagement system to Summit's technology portfolio. True to my word, I ensured that RevitaCare's development team received fair consideration for positions. 5 of their 7 engineers eventually joined Summit, bringing valuable expertise that accelerated the integration of the two technology platforms. Drew didn't contact me during the acquisition process, maintaining the professional distance established during our last meeting. Through industry channels, I heard he had taken a consulting position with a healthcare startup accelerator in Seattle, a role that leveraged his experience without requiring him to be the central figure or decision-maker. 6 months after acquiring RevitaCare's technology, Summit released the first fully integrated version of our healthcare management platform. The market response exceeded even our optimistic projections, with implementation requests from 28 new hospital systems in the first month alone. The elegant combination of Summit's predictive analytics with RevitaCare's patient engagement tools created a solution greater than the sum of its parts. On the platform's launch day, I received an unexpected email from Drew. "Congratulations on the integrated platform. The implementation is more elegant than anything we envisioned at Revita Care. You've built something remarkable. The message contained no requests or suggestions, just simple acknowledgement. After consideration, I replied with equal simplicity. Thank you. Your team's work made this possible. That brief exchange marked the beginning of a different phase. In our post-marriage relationship, not friendship exactly, but a mutual professional respect that existed independently from our personal history. We would never be close again, nor should we be given the betrayal that had ended our marriage. But we could acknowledge each other's contributions to the healthcare technology landscape without bitterness or recrimination. The following spring brought another milestone as Summit expanded internationally, opening offices in London and Singapore to support hospital implementations across Europe and Asia. Our workforce had grown to over 250 employees, with a corporate culture frequently cited in business publications as a model for innovation and inclusive leadership. During this period of rapid growth, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference in Seattle. The topic: Reclaiming Your Power, Leading Through Transition, seemed specifically tailored to my experience, though I had never publicly discussed the personal aspects of Summit's leadership change. After careful consideration, I accepted. The story of Summit's transformation deserved to be told, not as a tale of marital betrayal, but as an example of how crisis can catalyze positive organizational change when handled with strategic focus and authentic leadership. The conference venue was packed when I took the stage. The audience primarily composed of women in various leadership positions across multiple industries. Looking out at their expectant faces, I set aside my prepared remarks and decided to speak more directly than I had initially planned. 2 years ago, I discovered that my husband, who was also my business partner and the CEO of the company we had founded together, had been systematically undermining my contributions while preparing to replicate our core technology with another woman. It was a betrayal that was simultaneously personal and professional, striking at both my marriage and my life's work. A murmur ran through the audience at this unexpectedly candid opening. I'm sharing this not to garner sympathy or to vilify my ex-husband, but because many of you have likely experienced some version of having your contributions minimized, your expertise questioned, or your rightful position undermined, perhaps not as dramatically, but just as profoundly. Nods of recognition rippled across the room. What I learned through that experience wasn't just about detecting betrayal or exercising legal options, although those skills proved valuable. What I learned was that I had been complicit in my own diminishment, accepting a supporting role in a company built on my technical innovations, allowing someone else to become the public face of my work, shrinking my contributions to make someone else appear larger. I paused, letting this difficult truth resonate. The leadership transition at Summit Digital wasn't just about changing who sat in the CEO's chair. It was about reimagining what the company could become when built on authentic collaboration rather than hierarchical control. When we stopped defining success through a single charismatic leader and started recognizing the distributed brilliance throughout our organization. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined Summit's transformation, the flattened management structure, the innovation processes that elevated ideas based on merit rather than source, the transparency initiatives that built trust during uncertain times. I shared specific examples of employees whose contributions had flourished in this new environment, including Tyler Brooks, whose patient adherence platform had become the foundation of Summit's expanding influence. The most powerful lesson I've learned is that reclaiming your power isn't about dominating others or exacting revenge for past slights. It's about creating environments where everyone's best work can emerge, including your own. It's about recognizing that sustainable success comes from building systems that don't depend on any single person, even yourself. As the presentation concluded, the audience response was overwhelming. not just applause but a palpable sense of recognition and possibility. During the Q&A session that followed, the questions focused less on the details of my personal story and more on the practical aspects of organizational transformation and authentic leadership. Afterward, a line of women waited to speak with me briefly, many sharing their own experiences of having their contributions diminished or appropriated. I was struck by how universal certain patterns seemed, regardless of industry or organizational level. As the crowd thinned, I noticed a familiar figure waiting at a distance, Natalie Pearson, looking more subdued than when she had worked at Summit, but still impeccably put together. I hadn't seen her since the night I confronted Drew at our anniversary, though I knew she had eventually landed a marketing position with a pharmaceutical company after leaving Summit. She approached hesitantly when the last conference attendee departed. "That was a powerful presentation," she said, "particularly the part about creating systems that elevate everyone's contributions." "Thank you," I replied, curious about her presence but maintaining neutral politeness. "I've wanted to speak with you for some time," she continued, "to apologize properly for my role in what happened. I was so focused on advancing my career that I never questioned the ethics of how Drew was positioning me." Her apology seemed genuine, though it came very late. "We all made choices during that time," I acknowledged, "some better than others." "The thing is," she said, looking uncomfortable but determined, "working with Drew taught me exactly the wrong lessons about success. It was only after everything fell apart that I realized sustainable achievement comes from creating value, not from taking shortcuts or aligning with the most powerful person in the room." The insight surprised me. It showed a level of self-reflection I hadn't associated with Natalie based on our limited interactions. "It sounds like you've learned from the experience," I said. "That's all any of us can do with our mistakes." "I have," she affirmed. "My current role isn't as senior as what I briefly had at Summit, but it's built on genuine expertise and contribution rather than other factors." We spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation never becoming friendly but maintaining a civil tone that acknowledged our complicated shared history without dwelling on it. As we parted, Natalie offered one final observation. "You know, Drew always described you as brilliant but naive about business realities. Seeing what you've built at Summit proves he was half right about the brilliant part." The comment stayed with me as I flew back to Portland that evening. Drew's perception of me, as technically gifted but business naive, had shaped not just his treatment of me but my own self-image for years. Breaking free of that limitation had been as important as the legal and financial maneuvers that gave me control of Summit. Upon returning to Portland, I found Summit in the midst of preparing for our largest product launch yet, an expanded version of our platform designed specifically for rural healthcare systems with limited resources. The initiative had been Tyler's inspiration, born from his childhood experiences in a small farming community with minimal healthcare access. "The demos are exceeding expectations," Tyler reported during our project review meeting. "Rural hospital administrators are particularly impressed with the reduced infrastructure requirements and simplified implementation process." "And the pricing model?" I asked. "Scaled based on patient volume and facility resources," Daniel confirmed. "It makes the technology accessible to smaller systems while remaining financially sustainable for Summit." This approach embodied everything I had tried to build at Summit: innovation driven by genuine needs, implementation designed for maximum impact rather than maximum profit, and business models that balanced sustainability with accessibility. It was the antithesis of Drew's approach, which had prioritized impressive-sounding features and prestigious clients regardless of actual healthcare outcomes. The Rural Healthcare Initiative launched 2 months later to widespread industry acclaim. Healthcare technology publications praised not just the technical innovation, but the business model that made advanced capabilities accessible to underserved communities. Summit stock reached an all-time high, and our board approved an employee profit-sharing program that distributed the success across the organization. During this period of growth and recognition, Marcus Thompson announced his intention to retire from active legal practice. Over dinner, celebrating his distinguished career, he shared an observation that caught me by surprise. "Do you realize," he said, "that Summit now employs more women in technical and leadership roles than any comparable company in the healthcare technology sector?" I hadn't actually tracked those numbers specifically, I admitted. 57% of your technical staff and 62% of your leadership team are women, he continued. And it's not because of any explicit diversity initiative. It's because your hiring and promotion processes genuinely evaluate capability without the biases that plague most technology companies. The statistics were gratifying, but also thought-provoking. I hadn't set out to create a female-led organization. I had simply built systems that recognized merit wherever it appeared. The resulting gender balance was a natural outcome of removing the subtle barriers and biases that typically disadvantaged women in technical fields. The remarkable thing, Marcus continued, is that this has emerged organically from the culture you've built, not from quota systems or mandatory programs. It's authentic rather than performative. His observation crystallized something I had felt but never articulated about Summit's evolution. The company's transformation wasn't just about changing leadership or implementing new processes. It was about creating an environment where people could contribute at their highest level, without artificial constraints or political considerations. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation. Drew had written a guest article for a healthcare innovation journal and wanted my input before submission. The piece, titled "Collaborative Innovation in Healthcare Technology," explored how companies could cultivate environments where multiple perspectives enhanced technological development. The article was surprisingly insightful, acknowledging without self-aggrandizement how his leadership style at Summit had sometimes stifled collaboration, even while producing impressive short-term results. He contrasted this with Summit's current approach, citing publicly available information about our development processes and attribution systems. After reviewing the draft, I sent him a brief message. The article shows thoughtful reflection and valuable insights. No changes suggested. His reply came within minutes. "Thank you. Your feedback means more than most." This exchange, like our limited communications since the RevitaCare acquisition, maintained the delicate balance we had established, professional courtesy without pretending the past hadn't happened. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but rather a tacit agreement that our shared industry was better served by civil coexistence than ongoing animosity. As Summit approached the second anniversary of the leadership transition, I found myself reflecting on the journey during a rare, quiet weekend at my coastal cabin. The property that had once been a weekend retreat shared with Drew had been completely transformed, just as Summit had been. The structured garden had given way to native coastal plants that thrived with minimal intervention. The rigid interior design scheme had softened into comfortable spaces that invited creativity and relaxation. Sitting on the deck overlooking the Pacific, I realized that Summit's story, and my own, had never really been about betrayal and revenge, despite how it might appear from the outside. It had been about reclaiming authenticity and creating spaces where genuine value could flourish without artificial constraints. Drew's betrayal had been catastrophic in the moment, shattering the life I had built and the professional identity I had accepted. But from that destruction had emerged something more valuable, a company that better served its purpose, a leadership approach that elevated everyone's contributions, and personal confidence that no longer depended on external validation. The following Monday, I returned to Portland with renewed clarity about Summit's future direction. The company had stabilized after its rapid growth phase, establishing itself as an industry leader with a distinctive approach to healthcare technology. The question now was whether to maintain our current successful trajectory or pursue more ambitious expansion. The executive team gathered in the innovation lab, surrounded by whiteboards and digital displays showing our current projects and performance metrics. For 2 hours, we engaged in open discussion about potential growth paths, from international expansion to new technology areas to potential strategic partnerships. What strikes me about this conversation, Daniel observed toward the end, is how different it feels from strategic planning under previous leadership. We're evaluating options based on where we can create the most meaningful impact, not just where we can generate the most impressive growth statistics. That's because we've redefined success, I replied. Summit now measures achievement through healthcare outcomes and organizational sustainability, not just quarterly financial metrics or market positioning. As the meeting concluded, I remained behind, studying the visual representation of Summit's evolution displayed across the lab walls. The journey from a company built around a charismatic leader to one driven by collective purpose and distributed expertise was clearly visible in the changing project structures and attribution patterns over time. Tyler approached as I contemplated these visualizations. "Thinking about how far we've come?" he asked. "Reflecting on the unexpected paths that led us here," I replied. "When I discovered Drew's betrayal 2 years ago, I thought I was fighting to save what we had built together. I didn't realize I was actually creating space for something much better to emerge." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the structures we think are supporting us are actually limiting what we might become." The insight stayed with me as Summit continued its evolution in the months that followed. We formalized our approach to innovation through the creation of the Summit Institute, an internal think tank that gave talented employees dedicated time to explore healthcare challenges without immediate product development pressure. This structure institutionalized the creative freedom that had produced our most successful innovations, while ensuring Summit's commercial operations remained focused and efficient. Nearly 3 years after taking control of Summit Digital, I received an unexpected accolade, the Healthcare Technology Leadership Award, previously given to industry veterans with decades of high-profile experience. The recognition cited not just Summit's technological innovations, but the organizational culture that produced them, describing our approach as a blueprint for balancing innovation with sustainability in the digital health ecosystem. The award ceremony was held in San Francisco during the annual Healthcare Technology Summit, attended by leaders from across the industry. As I accepted the honor, I found myself thinking about the complex journey that had led to this moment. Not just the dramatic confrontation with Drew that had catalyzed Summit's transformation, but the thousands of smaller decisions and contributions that had shaped the company's evolution since then. "This award belongs to the entire Summit team," I told the audience, echoing words I had used at previous recognitions, but feeling their truth even more deeply now. "Our success comes from creating environments where everyone can contribute their best work toward our shared mission of improving healthcare through accessible technology." After the ceremony, several young women in technology roles sought me out, sharing how Summit's example had influenced their own career aspirations and leadership approaches. Their stories reinforced something I had gradually come to understand: that Summit's greatest impact might not be through our technology alone, but through demonstrating a different model of organizational success. Later that evening, as industry leaders gathered for a reception overlooking San Francisco Bay, I noticed Drew among the attendees. He was engaged in conversation with executives from a hospital system, looking more relaxed and authentic than I remembered from our Summit days. When our eyes met across the room, he offered a small nod of acknowledgement, which I returned before continuing my conversation with a healthcare AI researcher. An hour later, as the reception was winding down, Drew approached me directly. "Congratulations on the award," he said. "It's well-deserved." "Thank you," I replied, noting the absence of tension that had characterized our early post-separation encounters. "I heard your healthcare accelerator program is showing impressive results." He nodded. "It's fulfilling work, helping emerging Innovators avoid the mistakes I made while supporting their technical vision. Less glamorous than being CEO, but oddly more satisfying. The admission seemed genuine, a recognition that his talents were better applied in mentoring emerging leaders than in being the central figure himself. It was a level of self-awareness I hadn't seen in him during our marriage. Your article on collaborative innovation has become required reading for our new hires, I told him, offering the professional acknowledgement his work deserved. A flash of surprise crossed his face, followed by what appeared to be genuine gratification. Thank you for telling me that. We spoke for a few more minutes about industry trends and mutual acquaintances, maintaining the careful balance between professional courtesy and appropriate distance. As he prepared to leave, Drew offered one final observation. You know what's ironic? I spent years trying to build Summit into something impressive, something that would validate me as a leader and innovator. But you've built it into something important, something that actually changes how healthcare works. That's the vision I couldn't see. The comment stayed with me long after we parted ways, not because I needed Drew's validation, but because it accurately captured the fundamental difference in our approaches. Summit under his leadership had been constructed to impress. Summit under mine was designed to impact. 3 days later, back in Portland, I called an impromptu gathering of Summit's employees. Standing in our atrium surrounded by the people who had transformed the company, I shared a new vision for Summit's future, one that extended beyond our current success to more fundamental healthcare challenges. Summit began as a technology company creating software for healthcare systems, I told them. We've evolved into a healthcare company that leverages technology to improve patient outcomes. The next phase of our journey involves tackling the systemic gaps that technology alone cannot address. I outlined a 5-year initiative focusing on healthcare access disparities, using Summit's technology and expertise to support underserved communities and health systems with limited resources. The plan included dedicated investment in rural and urban community health centers, technology grants for safety net hospitals, and a fellowship program to support healthcare innovators from backgrounds underrepresented in technology. This direction won't generate the fastest growth or the highest short-term returns, I acknowledged. But it aligns perfectly with why most of us chose healthcare technology as our field, to make meaningful improvements in how care is delivered to those who need it most. The response was immediate and enthusiastic, with employees from across departments offering ideas and volunteering for initiative planning teams. The energy in the room confirmed what I had come to believe, that Summit's greatest strength wasn't our technology or business model, but the shared purpose that united our diverse workforce. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I paused at the window overlooking Portland. The city lights glimmered in the dusk, reminiscent of the night 3 years earlier when I had discovered Drew's betrayal. That discovery had shattered the life I had built, but had also created space for something more authentic to emerge, both professionally and personally. The company Drew had tried to hollow out had instead become more substantive and impactful than either of us had initially envisioned. The woman he had underestimated had found strength and purpose beyond being someone's supportive partner. The betrayal that should have destroyed everything had instead catalyzed a transformation more profound than revenge could ever accomplish. As I turned from the window and gathered my things to leave, I reflected on the most important lesson from Summit's journey. True power isn't found in controlling others or in claiming credit, but in creating environments where everyone can contribute their best work toward a shared purpose. By that measure, Summit wasn't just successful. It was significant in ways that transcended business metrics or industry recognition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.